David Wright grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. Known as a chubby kid playing shortstop, his love for baseball and his affinity for the Mets in particular dates back all the way to his childhood of going to minor league baseball games for the Norfolk Tides, the AAA minor league affiliate for the New York Mets. He got to go to many games because the team would hire off-duty officers to be security guards for the games. Wright's father was one of these officers. David grew up watching players in Norfolk working their way through the highest level of minor league baseball in the hope that they would get called up to the majors, the likes of Ray Ordonez and Jay Payton to name a few. Almost as if it was meant to be, in 2001, David Wright would end up being drafted by the Mets in the first round. He would work his way through the minors and eventually get promoted to AAA Norfolk. It was a very proud and special moment for him, as he would state, coming full circle back to Norfolk legitimately felt like getting called up to the big leagues. Wright would eventually get called up to the big leagues in 2004. He would have a strong showing to finish the season. The veteran players on the team did a ton to make sure his assimilation to the MLB was seamless. Wright would go on to say that having these experienced players on his first major league team impacted him greatly. He stated, "If I didn't have those type of veterans there to teach me the proper way to handle myself, it might not have impacted my success, but it certainly would have impacted my knowledge of how to be a leader." There is reason to be optimistic about the Mets' future with the emergence of both David Wright and the young shortstop, Jose Reyes. The team made significant moves that offseason to improve themselves. Wright had an amazing first full season as a big leaguer, but while the team did improve from 2004 to 2005, they still fell short of making the playoffs. But again, there was still reason to believe that the Mets would break through eventually. And with another offseason in which they made more significant player acquisitions, the Mets broke through in 2006. In one of the most remarkable seasons in team history, the Mets captured the 2006 National League East Division title and would make it all the way to the NLCS versus St. Louis Cardinals, with a trip to the World Series on the line. Unfortunately, the Mets season ended in heartbreaking fashion with a Game 7 loss at home, a bitter end to such a great season. Even with this disappointing result, it was still a great season, and many, including Wright, believed that this was only the beginning of their contention window and the Mets would be back. However, that would not be the case. The Mets would fail to qualify for the postseason for 8 straight seasons after 2006. The 2 seasons following 2006, the 07 and 08 seasons, were easily the most tragic, as the Mets entered the final day of each season with a chance to make the postseason only to come up short. Despite these heartbreaking seasons, David Wright managed to put up arguably his 2 best seasons in his entire career. He would capture both third base Silver Slugger and Gold Glove awards in back-to-back seasons. Wright would continue to put up very productive seasons even though the Mets team around him started to fall apart. In the following decade, in the 2010s, Wright would claim the Mets' career records for most hits and RBIs in franchise history. He would also be named the team captain in 2013, solidifying his status as one of the greatest players in Mets history. While there was plenty of good that was happening for Wright during this time, he also started to get injured very frequently. The biggest one being when he developed spinal stenosis, a condition in which spaces in the spine narrow and create pressure on the spinal cord and nerve roots. This would cause Wright to miss the majority of the 2015 season, and it would continue to plague him for the rest of his career. He did manage to return in 2015 after 3 long months of rehab. As he said, "I had been away for 3 months, but it felt more like 3 years. In his first at-bat after returning from rehab, he crushed a solo home run versus Philadelphia. He was eager to get back because the Mets were embarking on a magical run for the ages. He and the team were dying for a return to the postseason. The Mets won the 2015 National League East Division, and in the clinching game it was capped off with a Wright home run, and he got a huge reception from his teammates in the dugout, in a moment he won't forget. Quote, "The reception I received after that relatively meaningless home run is something I'll remember forever. They were acknowledging what I had done to make it back to the field." The Mets returned to the postseason for the first time since 2006, and who else but David Wright would go on to drive in the eventual winning runs in their first game back against the Dodgers. The Mets would go on to beat the Dodgers in the NLDS and then sweep the Chicago Cubs in the NLCS, clinching the 2015 National League pennant and a trip to the World Series for the first time since 2000 against the Kansas City Royals. The time off between games and series was pivotal for Wright, as he endured up to 5 hours of warm-ups before every game to get his back to cooperate. He wasn't going to miss out on what could possibly be his last playoff run and a chance to bring the Mets a World Series victory. And waiting for Wright in that World Series was arguably his last great moment of his career. In desperate need of a win in Game 3 after falling behind in the series and in the game, Wright stepped up to the plate and catapulted a 2-run home run into the left field stands to a thunderous reaction. He said it was one of the very few home run shots of his career that he knew was gone as soon as he had hit it. This was a moment many years in the making for Wright. He said, "I felt like I floated from one end of the dugout to the other. I will never ever forget that home run or how I felt in that moment. It's something I will hold close to myself for the rest of my life." Wright would cap off the night with a 2-run single in the 6th inning, and the Mets won Game 3 with a score of 9-3. However, the Mets would go on to fall to the Royals in 5 games and lose the World Series. While this was not the result everyone wanted, at the very least, David Wright finally got to have his World Series moment, and there is something special to be said about that. This would go on to be the beginning of his storybook ending to his career. He would make it back onto the field for opening day of 2016, setting the Mets record for most consecutive opening game starts with 12. However, his back was starting to aggravate him again, and he would suffer a herniated disc in his neck, which forced him to undergo the first surgery of his career, prematurely ending his season. The operation was very serious, and Wright had a grueling time recovering and trying to resume baseball activities as he tried to make his return in 2017, but unfortunately, he needed more surgeries, this time to both of his shoulders and his back, putting him out for the rest of the 2017 season. He could sense the end of his career was nearing the end. After doing everything he could to make the situation better, in 2018, Wright decided he would try to make it back for one final game and retire on his own terms. Even though his rehab assignments didn't go super well for him, he was still able to meet the stipulations that the Mets requested of him in order to activate him from the injured list for the first time in 2 years. In a tearful press conference, Wright announced that he would play in his final game on September 28, 2018. Tickets for this game sold out within hours of the news breaking, much to my dismay as I failed to get a ticket for this game. When the day finally came, David Wright took the field for the Mets for one final time. His daughter threw out the first pitch. He made one last play at the hot corner, like he always did. Took 2 final at-bats, embraced Jose Reyes for one final time on the right side of the infield, and then waved goodbye to the fans that he had come to adore over the last 14 years. He sat down with the SNY TV booth with Gary, Keith, and Ron, and with Howie Rose on the radio during the game. He made one last farewell speech at the conclusion of a Mets 1-0 walk-off victory over the Miami Marlins in 13 innings. As of this recording, Wright's name has officially been added to the Baseball Hall of Fame voting ballot. Whether he gets inducted or not, or even stay on the ballot, remains to be seen. Everyone will talk about his career being filled with what-ifs and could-have-beens, and how his injuries will possibly cost him his plaque in Cooperstown. But I, on the other hand, prefer to talk about for what he was and what he did accomplish. David Wright ended his career as the Mets' all-time leader in plate appearances, hits, runs, extra base hits, walks, RBIs, and wins above replacement. He was a 7-time All-Star, a 2-time Silver Slugger, a 2-time Gold Glove winner, and a member of the 30-30 Club. He is without a doubt one of the best players in Mets franchise history, and he will eventually have his number 5 raised to the Citi Field rafters, never to be worn again by another Mets player. His story is tragic but also very triumphant. He didn't allow the vicious nature of his injuries to end his career, and he was able to bravely come back and end his career on his own terms. His peak is certainly up there as one of the best of any player in baseball during his time, and especially at his position. He is the absolute pinnacle of class and hard-working nature for all athletes, and is a role model to many. People know how great he was and how important he was to the Mets, and honestly, in the end, that's all that really matters.